Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. The Honorable Dean of Law Faculty of Hasanuddin University, represented by the Head of International Law Department, Ms. Dr. Iin Karita Sakarina, SHMA. The Honorable Speakers, Mr. Professor Dr. SM Nur, SHMH, Ms. Amrita Viswanath Shenoy, PhD, and Ms. Suwai Mon, PhD. So apologize for the wrong spelling. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the webinar of Law of the Sea, Development and Future Challenges. This webinar is held by International Law Department of Law Faculty of Hasanuddin University in order to celebrate the 70th anniversary of Law Faculty of Hasanuddin University. First of all, let us send our gratitude to the Almighty God for His greatness and blessings, so we can all gather virtually in this occasion despite the current global pandemic of COVID-19. My name is Normiati, and I will be your Master of Ceremony of today's webinar. The first agenda is an opening remarks delivered by the Head of International Law Department, Dr. Iin Karita Sakarina, SHMA, and as well as to officially open the webinar. To Dr. Iin Karita Sakarina, time is yours.
Thank you, Nomi, as a MC. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Is my voice clearly here?
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Yes, it's clear, ma'am.
Thank you. Honorable keynote speakers, Minister of Transportation of Republic Indonesia, Mr. Budi Karya Kusumadi, the honorable speakers who are coming from the different parts of the world and of course different time zones. First, there is Miss Amrita Viswanath Shenoy, PhD from Kathmandu School of Nepal. Please forgive me if I spell your name wrong. And Suwai Mon, PhD from Faculty of Law, University of Malaya. Sam, please forgive me if I spell your name wrong. And then also the honorable speaker from our Department of International Law, our senior professor, Professor Dr. SM Nur, SHMH. And my dearest Natalis committee team and the faculty staff work tireless to ensure all of our plan even have turned into the reality. Last but not least, my respectable audience of virtual seminar, the fact that many of you have allocated the time to be here serves as a reminder to us all just how important our work here is to bridge global awareness on the issue of the law of the sea. My name is Iin Karita Sakarina, as mentioned by the MC before. I am the head of International Law Department. And then here, I am also representing of our Dean, Professor Paridapati Tinggi, because she is still not feeling well. And she sent her best regards to all the speakers and then to all the participants, and also she apologized for not being able to attend this webinar because of her condition now. The Faculty of Law of Hasanuddin University is delighted to have you with us to participate and engage in this international webinar series to commemorate the 70th anniversary of our beloved faculty. Thank you for joining this Zoom session. The Faculty of Law of Hasanuddin is committed to actively educate not only our future legal professionals, but also the public on the importance of being critical of the laws and how it affects us as Indonesian or as part global citizens of the world. This year's webinar theme is the law of the sea, development and future challenge. As an archipelagic state with long coastal lines, Indonesia plays a pivotal role in the Law of the Sea Convention. As we know that one of the prominent Indonesian legal scholars, Professor Mohtar Kusuma Atmaja, successfully introduced the concept or archipelago state to the international forum. The concept now we can see in the 1982 United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea. Concerning that, today the challenges we face are different from the past. Therefore, we have to keep striving to take pivotal roles in the Law of the Sea regime. To add, our webinar team is also following the vision and mission of Universitas Hasanuddin as the maritime-based university. And before I hand over my session to our MC, I want to say once more on behalf of the Faculty of Law of the Law Faculty of Universitas Hasanuddin to welcome. We are honored today to have speakers who are passionate and knowledgeable about the issues of the law of the sea. So please use this opportunity to learn and discuss their ideas or visions on the future laws and regulation around the world. Now, on behalf of Dean, I officially open this afternoon webinar with theme, Law of the Sea Development and Future Challenge. Enjoy the webinar and thank you very much. Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Karita Sakarina, for the beautiful remarks and for opening this event. Now we will proceed to our main agenda. The webinar presentation and discussion session will be guided by our moderator, Dr. Birkah Latif SH, MH LLM. And apart from being the lecturer at the Law Faculty of Hasanuddin University, she now also serves as Secretary of International Law Department of Law Faculty of Hasanuddin University. And without further ado, I pass the floor to our moderator, Dr. Birkah Latif.
Birkah, you start now.
Hello?
Yeah, we are here.
Jelek ke sinyal kok, Kak.
Birkah?
Okay. Hello, thank you so much for the opportunity from the and I also for the organizing committee.
Sorry, Bu Iin, Bu Birkah.
Before that,
you can now use the faculty Wi-Fi.
Is in good health.
Your voice now good.
Ma'am, you can now use the faculty the Wi-Fi now. It's on now.
I have
the faculty Wi-Fi is on now, so you can change your network from your mobile network to the campus Wi-Fi. Okay. Apologize for the connections because we just had electricity off in our faculty, but it's just now on like 5 minutes ago. So they are using their own mobile network. So maybe we can wait for 1 or 2 minutes.
Because of the condition of the electricity problem in our faculty, and then conflicted with our Wi-Fi in faculty. I apologize again praise and gratitude. We send it to the God Almighty for the bless, so we could join in the 70th anniversary of Law Faculty, Hasanuddin University anniversary. And for today, we are we have a discussion on this international webinar about law of the sea, development and future challenge. And for today, I would like to thanks to the head of International Law Department, Dr. Iin Karita Sakarina SHMA, for the welcoming and also opening our webinar for today. For today, we also have several speakers. First of all, we also have the keynote speaker from Insinyur Budi Karya Sumadi, who is the Minister of Transportation for Republic of Indonesia, who is currently unable to attend. A big apologies from the our minister because of very urgent activity, so he could not be joined with us for today. And then also we have our second session speaker with Professor Amrita Viswanat Senoy, LLB, PhD. And we also have the third of our speakers, Professor Suwai Mon, LLB, MCL, PhD. And also we have our prominent professor, senior in international law faculty, Professor SM Noor. Without canceling the time anymore, let me please to read a short CV from the several of our speakers for today. First of all, I will read the Professor Amrita short biography. Fulfilled the PhD thesis on 2018, LLM about human rights, School of Law, Ansal University, Gurung Ram, Haryana, and with the very higher scores about the nexus between insolvency laws and human rights. And also already submitted PhD thesis in 2017 about international independent India from 1947. She also have a lot of not only capability and also share the academic writing, got the awards and distinctions in 2012, merit certificate for being of the topper. Professor SM Noor?
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, thank you, because we heard this, being the topper of Mahatma Gandhi University, Kerala Bumi Sarada Krishna Foundation for Law and Justice from the Chief Justice of Kerala High Court. A very distinctive achievement. Of course, we know academic achievement and a lot of activities and also paper presentation that she had gained while she's doing lots of activities for academical events. And then I will also to read Professor Suwai Mon, LLB, MCL, PhD, is a senior lecturer at the Faculty of Law, University of Malaya. She obtained her LLB from Dagon University, Yangon, and completed her postgraduate studies, Master of Comparative Law, MCL, and PhD from the International Islamic University, Malaysia. Her PhD emphasized on maritime security and law enforcement, particularly on Malaysian maritime law enforcement. Her areas of research interests include maritime security, international law of the sea, public international law, and maritime law. She has presented at local and also in conference Hasanuddin University, finished his master and also PhD program in Unhas graduate program. He is also not only to teach teach and research regarding the law of the seas issues, but also have become an expert into the China policy in international relationship. He also become as a columnist, the writers for the lots of analysis regarding international aspect in Indonesian newspaper. And then he also already got lots of books and writing regarding regarding international agreement issues and also about international law aspects. So without hesitate, I already read all of our speaker for today. And by listening to the short CV of our speakers today, then we can see various experience that they have done, especially in the marine sector, and it will be happily to be shared with us for today. And then based on from the organizing committee have shared the agenda for today, I will firstly to please Professor Amrita Viswanath Senoy, LLB, MPhil, and PhD to present her material for today. To Professor Amrita.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Times is yours.
Yeah. We hear you good.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Amrita.
Okay. So I don't have PowerPoint because I rarely use it. I told Professor Kadruddin that I will be talking. So thank you so much for inviting me to this webinar, and also congratulations for the 70th anniversary of the university. And since Professor Kadruddin asked me to talk about history of law of the sea, because my research is vastly confined to history of international law. And my thesis of PhD was on the history of international law in pre-independent India, submitted to Jawaharlal Nehru University. So here I'm going to confine my talk on few aspects on the history of law of the sea, circulating as to what history Asia had on law of the sea, especially. Just a few points on that. But before that, I'll be first of all talking about history of international law in general, and then history of law of the sea as it was in Asia, and the European narratives, borrowings, and discourse. So this is what I'm going to talk about. So starting with the history of international law, history was largely confined to the third world perspective to international law. But in recent times, there is a turn to history where many scholars like Marty Koskinemi and from throughout the world, various other scholars have been talking about the history of international law. So the question is, they are trying to trace the history of international law to Europe, but from a third world perspective, we have to look into the history of international law from our past, from Asia's past, and Southeast Asia's past. So that's the main point here. So in the 1960s and 1970s, after the Bandung Conference and the birth of third world perspective to international law, till the 1990s, a lot of emphasis
was given on the history of international law. But after that, a lot of liberalization happened, globalization happened, and history was somewhat forgotten. But in the recent times, we can say not even a decade, history is coming back. So there is a turn to history in international law. So that's what we see. Many scholars writing about it. Emmanuel Jaunet, Marty Koskinemi being the prominent names. But these are European scholars writing the history from their own perspective. They are talking about the birth of international law is from the West. There is no perspective of international law from the East. There is no borrowing of international law from the East. That is what their claim is. But what we have to look into is there are various fragments of international law which have borrowed many concepts from the East. So my talk today is about one of such concepts, that is freedom of the seas, that has come from the ancient times, seen by the Europeans and borrowed by the Europeans and taken as a concept by the Europeans for their own benefit though, and gradually came into UNCLOS and taken the position of common heritage of mankind with regard to high seas. So this is my topic today, like confining to the concept of freedom of the seas. So now one aspect is, like I said, the history of international law is being written from the European, by the European scholars from the European viewpoint. But there are many young scholars from our part of the world who are trying to talk about history. For many, it would be a boring perspective that why should we look into history? What is the point of looking into history? But in today's world, when there are major powers which are playing the role in international affairs, like US, Russia, China, etc., we need to focus on our histories and we need to talk about our histories so that it is learned that it is not the Europeans that have gifted international law to us, but we have also given many aspects to them. We have also taught them many aspects. Like in recent times, when we are looking into the Russia-Ukraine war, the major basis, like the major talk which we see, if you watch Trevor Noah, you can see he had pointed out that people are talking about how can such a war happen in Europe? Europe is a civilized place. Such a war cannot happen. But at the same time, when the US was attacking Iraq, when the US was attacking Afghanistan, it was like it's their right to do so. There is responsibility to protect. There are human rights which is going to be established. But when Russia, I'm not justifying war though, but when Russia is attacking Ukraine, they are saying that we are civilized. How can such a war happen in our place? So this concept needs to change. Like if you are talking about Ukraine today, we all have right to talk about any state, whether it be Iraq, Afghanistan, or any Asian state where they try to establish their rules. So we need to come up with our discourses. So this part of history of international law has various Eastern perspectives being given, like the third world perspective to international law, or the multi-civilizational perspective to international law, or the trans-civilizational perspective to international law, like shared by Professor Onuma Yasuaki. So now coming to the freedom of the seas in Asia as it was and how it was taken by the Europeans. That's what my narration today is about. So seafaring and trade, free trade, was there between Southeast Asia, India, China, Mediterranean areas, and every, like Rome. Since ancient times, there was seafaring and trade. And there are accounts also, even in the Western accounts, like the Periplus of Erythraean Sea, Strabo, Megasthenes. All these people have talked about seafaring, shipbuilding, etc. in Asian region. But basically the states were land powers, and they tried to control external and internal navigation somewhat for the state control, but they were confined to power on land. And like there is a international law scholar called C.J. Charco, who wrote from the Indian perspective, and he said that there was no strict delimitation of the seas at the time, and the concept of freedom of the seas existed. And whenever a state tried to put in monopoly over the seas, there was someone who broke it. For example, there was this Chola emperor of South India who used to trade in the Southeast Asian region called Rajendra I. What he did was, Sumatra had established monopoly over the sea route towards China. So Rajendra wanted to have freedom of the seas so that he could trade. So he broke that monopoly and again talked about freedom of the seas. And there is also an ancient scholar called Kautilya, who is known as a realist. What he did was he talked about destruction of pirate ships, piracy, etc. So largely from the historical accounts, we can see that there was free trade between Asians, and there was freedom of the seas as an important concept that was generally accepted and practiced. So gradually, the Europeans came, the discovery of the New World, the Portuguese coming to the Asian region, and they tried to establish their own monopoly over the seas. And the Portuguese said that only Christians can own property, and therefore they established the concept of mare clausum, that is closed seas. Whereas mare liberum was proposed by the Dutch, the father of international law, so-called father of international law, was the advocate of VOC, or the Dutch East India Company. He said that there is no concept of closed seas. There is this concept of open seas, that is mare liberum. And anonymously, he wrote a booklet called Mare Liberum that talked about freedom of the seas as practiced in Asia. Even though it was the ulterior motive of the Dutch to talk about freedom of the seas in Asia, but he wrote this, he talked about this as largely practiced in Asia. There was no control over the seas by the Asians. So free trade was allowed, and therefore Dutch should be allowed to have free trade and freedom of the seas in the Asian region. So the ulterior motive was they could export the materials or raw materials from the Eastern region to Europe. That was the ulterior motive. But the Dutch said about it, wrote about it. So to further understand this, you can look into the third world scholars, the 12 perspective scholars, C.H. Alexandrovics and Professor R.P. Anand, who talked about the history of international law and the freedom of the seas as practiced in Asia. So the Dutch basically talked about the freedom of the seas when they wanted it. But gradually what happened is they faced competition from the English. The English came, they started exploring the seas. They practiced open seas, and they were trying to exploit all the resources from the eastern region so that they can gain from the trade. When the English East India Company was doing that, the Dutch started getting loss in the trade which they were doing. So what they did was they sent a delegation to England talking about mare clausum. So when they talked about the closed sea concept, the English brought this booklet called Mare Liberum and showed it to them. They said there is freedom of the seas which is practiced in Asia. And Asia is something which we cannot talk about totally as uncivilized. We cannot control it totally like we are doing with other part of the world, like the South Americans, etc. So what we need to do is we need to practice freedom of the seas as practiced in Asia. So the English showed the booklet to the Dutch. And finally, it was settled, but we can see various conflicts happening between the Europeans, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the French, the English, in the eastern colonized regions gradually. But they accepted this concept of freedom of the seas. They practiced this concept of freedom of the seas for their own gain. That is import of goods from the East to Europe. And gradually, Grotius, through his writings and through his ideas, came to be known as the father of international law. But even today, even in the discussions of UNCLOS, we can see how the newly decolonized states talked about the freedom of the seas and how their contribution was towards establishing the freedom of the seas, and various concepts through even Asian African legal consultative organization, which played an important role in the formation of the present law of the seas, even though it is being broken in various ways, talking about the realist concept of international relations. We can see how China, USA, Russia, many other states, sea powers, we can say, since we are talking about law of the sea, they're trying to break it in many ways. For example, South China Sea arbitration, we can see many grounds where such freedoms were broken. So when we talk about the history, when we trace it to the ancient times till the formation of the UNCLOS, which we will be discussing, and the future of law of the sea, the importance of law of the sea, we also need to look into the past, where our region was very much rich in resources, very much rich in its own power exercising ways. So this is something which I wanted to focus today, especially the freedom of the seas, and how Europe has taken this concept and does not accept in many ways that it is being borrowed from the Asian region. So thank you very much for the patient listening. I think we can move on to next speaker. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Professor Amrita Viswanath Senoy, LLB, MPhil and PhD, for the material, especially about the historical and more aspect about the freedom of the seas. We will move to the next of speaker. I will say a big apologize to Professor SM Nur because of my mistake.
Mr. Birka, Miss Birka, I think it's better if we give opportunity for Miss Sui Waymon.
Oh.
Let me last Right.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for Professor S.M. Nur for your guidance and your also permit. I will go to our professor Suwaimon LLB MTL PhD for giving her presentation. For Professor Suwaimon, the time is yours.
Right.
Thank you so much. I don't see the button to share the slide because I have the outline. Can someone help me, because in my Zoom app I cannot share. Okay, found it.
Wait, Professor Suwai, we will ask the.
Yeah, right.
Okay, yeah.
Good, good.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Good, Suleiman.
Okay, thank you so much.
Go ahead.
Yes, I think it's good afternoon or good afternoon. Yeah, still good afternoon, Indonesia. So good afternoon, everyone, and Assalamualaikum. First of all, I would like to say congratulations for the 70th anniversary of University Hasanuddin, and also I'm very grateful and honored to be here today. And thank you for the invitation. So my sincere appreciation to the Dean of the Faculty of Law, University of Hasanuddin, and also the Department of International Law, and of course our dear friend Dr. Kadaruddin for the kind invitation. So thank you so much. So today I'll be talking about maritime security and law enforcement, the Malaysian perspective. So in fact, it's very good that the presentation, Dr. Amrita was talking about the history of the law of the sea, the background of the law of the sea. She is a really good scholar in the history of international law. So now I'll move on to the next topic, which is, I would say, part of the law of the sea, yeah? Because this is not the introduction to the law of the sea. I'm sure I asked who will be the audience for today's webinar, and I was told that the students and also the lecturers of the different campus from Indonesia. So I assume that everyone will already have some kind of background of international law or the law of the sea in general, because I wanted to know that which part I should focus. Okay, so enough with the introduction. So I will move on to the outlines of my presentation, because my topic is a little bit technical. So I really have to make it very clear. So when we talk about maritime security, we have to start with the definition. What is maritime security? Because whenever we start learning something, that we want to know what is it all about. What is it, right? We have this scope and limitation. So if we are talking about maritime security, in what perspective of security we are talking about? So we need to define the maritime security, and another major content of my presentation would be maritime law enforcement. So what is maritime law enforcement all about, and major maritime security threats, because my focus would be today for the Malaysian perspective. So what are the major maritime security threats that Malaysia is facing today, and maritime law enforcement agencies, the current enforcement mechanisms in Malaysia, and the issues and challenges for the Malaysian maritime security, and what would be the way forward. And with that, I will end my presentation by discussion on the way forward, what Malaysia should do in the future. So first, maritime security. So if we want to know, like we asked the definition, what is the definition of maritime security? We do not have the universal definition. So it would be different, like depending on the persons who is defining it. If you are an academic, or if you are from the private sector, if you are from the industry, so depending on the background, if you are from the Navy defense perspective, so people will have the different perspective on maritime security. So it's still the same word, the same term that they use, but the content and the perspective would be different. So we don't have the universal definition right now for the term maritime security. So maritime security is nowadays, it's quite popular where whenever we read this law of the sea matters, the updates, what's happening in the world, and this term become more popular lately. So maritime security is one of the latest buzzwords of international relations, according to Professor Christian Berger. In his article in 2014. So maritime security issue has become salient only after the September 11 terrorist attack. So again, like, Professor Amrita discussed just now, that it seems that the West has to take an initial step to make it something very, very important, right? So you can see that this September 11 attack happened in the United States, and then right after that, they realized that these kind of things or attack can happen in the maritime sector as well. Then that's how this term become more and more popular. And within the ambit of maritime security, there have been so many initiatives that international community, established so far. So only after that, the world has shown a serious concern over the issue of maritime security. So in particular in the 21st century. So like I said just now, there are various definitions depending on the person who defines it. But we can differentiate into two types of threats, which are conventional threats. So again, when I define for the purpose of my presentation, I define maritime security from the threats perspective. What are the crimes happening out there today, right? What are the maritime security threats? So from the threats perspective, if we define, we have two types of threats, two categories. Conventional threats are wartime threats. So it's a war fighting between different navies. And contemporary threats are the peacetime threats. Not necessarily there has to be the war, but there are the security threats going on. So this would be the illustration for the naval warfare, and this will fall under the category of conventional threats. And contemporary threats they refer to the security threats in the maritime domain, including piracy, maritime piracy, maritime terrorism, trafficking of people and narcotic drugs and other illicit goods, and armed proliferation, illegal fishing, environmental crimes of maritime incidents and disasters as well. So the expanded range of maritime security threats poses serious risks particularly to the safety of the ships, the ports they sail to, and the persons aboard them, as well as added danger to the cargoes they are carrying. So this is the illustration, as you can see. This is the terrorist attack, maritime terrorist attack. And this is the piracy. This is the Somalian pirates. And for those who want to know how pirate attacks happen, you can watch Captain Phillips. And this is the oil pollution. Okay, is someone speaking? Sorry. Hello?
No. No.
Okay. So
Go ahead.
This is the illustration for the drug trafficking. This is for the illegal fishing. And this is how human trafficking happened. So now this is just because I have like around 15 minutes. I hope I can finish within 15 minutes. So this will be the major part of my presentation. What is maritime law enforcement? So there are various international rules and standards for maintaining maritime security. The establishment of an effective maritime security regime necessitates not only the prescription of rules, but also their enforcement. Because we can have so many, we can come out with different laws or different, whether it is soft law or hard laws, the conventions we can have, but if we don't apply them, if we cannot implement them, right, there will be no effect. So the enforcement is really, really important. So according to Anderson, rules which are not enforced are ineffective, and persistent non-enforcement weakens the entire system of regulation. So under maritime law, or under the law of the sea, there are three main actors which has enforcement power. The coastal state, the port state, and the flag state are authorized, as the case may be, to exercise enforcement jurisdiction in accordance with international rules and standards. But I don't have time to go into detail how the coastal state exercise jurisdictions and port state and the flag state. So students can further study on that. So maritime law enforcement, this is the according to Professor Burke, has well summarized what enforcement jurisdictions involve from the law of the sea perspective. So enforcement is the process of invoking and applying authoritative prescriptions. So the range of operations includes surveillance, stopping and boarding versus search or inspection, reporting, arrest or seizure of persons and vessels, detention and formal application of law by judicial or other process, including imposition of sanctions. Both aspects of jurisdictions are critical to the protection of states from maritime security threats. Both aspects means the prescriptive jurisdiction as well as the enforcement jurisdictions, and they are complementary to each other. So in order to give effect of the prescriptive measures, meaning that the laws that we have, the legislation, the rules that we have against maritime security threats, it is vital to exist effective law enforcement measures as well as efficient law enforcement bodies. So now we'll be talking about Malaysia. So if we look at Malaysia, Malaysia has 4192 kilometers of coastline, and you can see in this map, it is one of the littoral states to the Malacca Straits of Malacca, and it has also the South China Sea here. And in fact, here, this is the Borneo, and Sabah Sarawak is also part of Malaysia, and it is also bordered to the Sulu and Celebes Seas, and this side would be the Philippines, yeah? Sulu, Sulawesi is this side, yeah? So this is how Malaysia is it has a long coastlines, and it aims itself is to become a maritime nation, a recognized maritime nation. It has very, very good ambitions to become pioneer in maritime trade, and also one of the significant players. So major maritime security threats in Malaysia. So now, what type of threats that Malaysia is facing, or the challenges against its sustainable maritime security in Malaysia as a maritime nation? So piracy and armed robbery. But I will be sharing today that in what aspect Malaysia is doing well, and in what aspect Malaysia has to put more effort or to beef up its security efforts and enforcement efforts to ensure the sustainable maritime security in its waters. So in terms of piracy and armed robbery, it has significantly declined. Yeah, it is no longer popular currently. So we don't see that, according to the International Maritime Bureau report, we don't see the cases in Malaysian waters and also in the Straits of Malacca. With the continuous cooperation and collaboration between the littoral states, the threats has declined significantly in terms of this piracy and armed robbery. So in terms of maritime terrorism, we don't really have suicide bombing and all of that, but we have this KFR, kidnapping for ransom, especially in Sabah, because it's very close to the Philippines, this eastern coast of Sabah. And there were always kidnapping incidents, and they will ask for the ransoms. If the ransom is has not been paid, then they will just behead the victim. So these were the threats that they had in the east coast of Sabah. And I will discuss a little bit more on some of the crimes as well. So IUU fishing, illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing, and maritime territorial disputes. So these would be the major discussions for my presentations today. So as I have mentioned just now, piracy and maritime armed robbery, it has been declined. So we can say that, yes, the efforts was efficient. their law enforcement efforts were efficient. So that's why we can see the decline. And not only for the Malaysia, even for the worldwide, we can see that the piracy cases has been declined significantly. Yeah. So for when it comes to this kidnapping for ransom incidents in the east coast of Sabah, we can see it's very recently, December 8th, it says in the news Rex time, there have been 0 kidnapping since 2020. So it has been 2 years that there were no kidnapping cases in the east coast of Sabah. And now next stretch would be IUU fishing. So IUU fishing seems to be a really serious problem for Malaysia right now. So Malaysia loses up to 6 billion ringgit, which is $1.4 billion to illegal fishing every year, which is, and also for Indonesia, I also found this too, so I incorporated about Indonesia as well, since I'll be talking to the Indonesian audience, $2 billion a year in Indonesia. So Malaysia and Indonesia have agreed to hold joint patrols against illegal fishing in the Malacca Strait and the North Natuna Sea. And this initiative will include sharing technological advancement in monitoring and will be formalized and in an agreement drafted by both governments later this year. So, and Indonesia seized 22 Malaysian flag boats in 2021, while 14 Indonesian nationals are currently facing legal proceedings for illegal fishing in Malaysia. So we still have this pending exclusive economic zone between Malaysia and Indonesia as well. So there is a gray area. So both sides, the fishermen will go there and fish there. But previously, when I interviewed the Malaysian Navy, they have a mutual agreement that both sides, both government or both the government law enforcement, they won't address the fishermen in the gray area, because they say that they really empathize, because they arrest the fishermen and then they bring them to the shore and they were being charged and put them in the jail. But at the end of the day, that their family suffers. But it seems that now, both countries have been seizing the vessels and arresting. So probably the agreement has been expired, or, but we can see that these two countries are willing to have a collaborative activity to suppress this particular threats called IUU fishing. And next is this maritime territorial dispute. So by looking at these issues, like, we just need to define the line between the countries. So it's not really a threat. That's what we see normally, right? Or maybe countries are claiming the sovereignty over certain area or the islands, like what happened in the South China Sea issues, and between Malaysia and Malaysia and Singapore is Pulau Batu Putih, and between Malaysia and Indonesia with Pulau Sipadan and Litikan Islands, the sovereignty over the island. So normally, if we look at these issues, that we might say that, oh, this is not the maritime security threat, but there is a real threat, and it seems to be a bit more even serious, because it can even it can create the tensions, and it can affect the diplomatic ties between peaceful relationship between the countries as well. So I will explain a little bit in my last slide of this. So agencies responsible for maritime law enforcement in Malaysia. So in Malaysia, before the establishment of MMEA, which is Malaysian Maritime Law Enforcement Agency, this was established in 2004, and the MMEA at 2004 to become the integrated maritime law enforcement agency. So if you ask me who is responsible for maritime law enforcement in Malaysia, then we will just have to say this is MMEA, because it is authorized to apply and enforce all the available federal laws in Malaysia in Malaysian maritime zones. Yeah. So this, before the establishment of MMEA, what the situation looks like, you can see that there have been 12 different agencies handling and dealing with maritime security threats in Malaysia, or maritime law enforcement in Malaysia. So they realized that if we have too many agencies, then our enforcement won't be effective. So with that intention, also because around 2005, the Straits of Malacca was declared as the war risk area, and there have been continuous pressures from the United States, Japan, saying that, okay, we will come and help you guys. We will come and secure your water. Of course, their navy or their government versus will be coming. But at that time, although Singapore was very welcome, Indonesia and Malaysia say that it is okay, because Indonesia and Malaysia, we will handle it. If you want to help us, you can give us, in terms of financial assistance and giving assets to us, and also training our officers. So with that, this is one of the effort that, look, we are doing our own actions. We are taking our own action as the literal state. So this is one of the effort of Malaysia to come up with this agency called Malaysian Maritime Law Enforcement Agency. And we can also call it the Coast Guard. So it has a patrol boat, but after it has established, the other agency, as you can see here, there are 12 different agencies. Some of the other agencies, like for example, Department of Environment, Department of Fisheries, they surrender all their assets. Assets means the boats, like petrol boats. They surrender all their assets. But the problem is the assets are very, very old, like more than 30 years old. So these are the challenges that MMEA face, although they, it's something like, yes, now we have the law enforcement agencies, but still that there are a lot more to be improved. Yeah. So to understand what is a Coast Guard, I'm sure Indonesia also has a Coast Guard. So Coast Guard is just a police force. It's a civilian force. It's not different. It's different from Navy. It's not part of Navy. So it's directly under the Prime Minister Department. And so now functions of the MMEA, what are its functions? Is to enforce law and order under any federal law. And also it is authorized to perform maritime search and rescue. So when there was this mission of MH 370, of course, MMEA is one of the agencies to do search and rescue, and also to prevent and suppress the commission of an offense, and also air and coastal state surveillance and any other matter. So mainly it will be search and rescue, and also it can also control and prevent maritime pollution, and also to suppress piracy and other maritime crimes, and even to suppress illicit traffic in narcotic drugs on the high sea. So this is, you can see, this is the Maritime Malaysia. This is the patrol boat of Maritime Malaysia. And this is the vessel that was gifted by the Japan Coast Guard. So this vessel was with the Japanese Coast Guard, and they give these ships to the MMEA. So I just got the very informal photo of the staff. So yeah, this is the uniform personnel of the MMEA. So now, then, okay, for Malaysian Maritime Law Enforcement, yeah, these are the threats. Some threats have been declined, and it seems that now we really have to work on the IUU fission, because currently it seems to be the most serious threats for the Malaysia. And we can also see that Malaysia is working with the neighboring countries, which is Indonesia, to suppress this crime. And what are the issues and challenges we are facing in terms of laws and also in terms of enforcement when it comes to maritime security? And we can see that Malaysia is slow in the implementation and domestication of ratified conventions, because Malaysia is a dualist countries, which is whenever they ratify the convention, they need to domesticate it by passing the national law by their national parliament. So although Malaysia is the member of the UNCLOS, but Malaysia does not have the Piracy Act. So I would love to hear what is the situation in Indonesia as well later on in the discussion. So Malaysia does not have the particular Piracy Act, and that's the reason why whenever they arrest the pirates, they have to use the relevant legislation or relevant provisions from the penal code, like armed robbery, theft, so robberies and theft, the related provisions from the penal code that they use. They don't really have the crime in the penal code as piracy, the act of piracy. So it's not defined anywhere in their penal code. And no substantive law to take action against piracy. In need of systematic national maritime security policy. They don't really have the clear policy right now, especially in terms of distribution of powers among the agencies in enforcing the law, like who follows whose order, it's not clear. While the National Security Council, which is also directly under the Prime Minister's department, it is the primary agency dealing with all national security issues, of course, including maritime sector, but it has no executive role in managing maritime law enforcement issues, but it's just like a secretariat in nature. So it's in need of consideration to make a stronger and more authoritative agency regarding maritime security. And also there are overlapping jurisdictions between the agencies and there is no clear-cut policy to sort out the situation. So we can say that why we still have overlapping jurisdictions, because now we only authorize MMEA to exercise all the law enforcement power. So the situation is that, yes, although we have MMEA right now, other agencies are, it's not like the abolished, you know, the other agencies are still there. It seems that MMEA, yes, we have the power, we have the authority according to the legislation, but in reality, the other agencies are also still doing their own things. And also another thing is, since they are vessels, the assets are very old, they can't stay longer in the sea, so they still always have to take, you know, assistance from the Navy, because Navy ships are better and stronger. Yeah. So these are some of the challenges that we can see. And now, what is the way forward for Malaysia? So Malaysia's sustainable maritime security has to be ensured for national security. So at the upper level, the government has to acknowledge that maritime security is an important matter, right? Maritime security is really, really important, that have to acknowledge it. And then if they acknowledge, definitely there will be more efforts and, you know, some in terms of like budget allocations and all. But there are some positive signs that we can see. Malaysia now, MMEA is getting soon. Yeah, the new petrol boats are coming for the MMEA very soon. I just read recently. And we really need a systematic maritime security policy. And of course, we need a sound legal and regulatory framework. The law has to be strong first, then after that, followed by the effective and efficient law enforcement mechanisms. And of course, in terms of budgets, we need budget to buy assets. So budgets and assets has to be, you know, have to be capable, because if nowadays, even if we talk about pirates and maritime criminals, they are very sophisticated. Pirates start using all the GPS signal, you know, to track. They don't need to go there and wait for the ships to come. They just use the internet only. They track which vessels is coming from which route. You know, they become so sophisticated. So enforcement agency has to also be high tech and also well equipped to cope with all the contemporary and modern threats. And we can see that for budget, you can see 40 years old, 30 years old, which are currently stationed in waters around Peninsular Malaysia. We can see that the assets are very old. And of course, the manpower and training. And another thing is manpower and training for the, you know, the capabilities of the staffs are also very, very important. And suppression of contemporary threats such as cyber threats in the maritime domain. So previously, we only talk about physical threats. One pirate ship go and attack another ships, you know, and even for the maritime terrorism, a person, if there when, you know, you want to bomb the ships, have to go there and, you know, have to personally present there to attack the ships. But nowadays, the systems are becoming more and more advanced. Like you just need to hack. Nowadays, the ships become more, you know, connected to the internet, and ships are online, the systems. If you are the very good hacker, then you go and hack the systems and you can disrupt the safety of navigations and even to explore. And some more, we are the littoral straits to the very narrow and congested straits of Malacca. So emerging that thousands and thousands of seagoing ships and that oil tankers are passing through the Malacca Strait. So if the terrorists took control of the systems and they try to exploit the LNG tanker, it will be more serious than the nuclear bomb. So there is a real threat out there. So we have to be, it's not happening yet. We can't do that. There is something already happened. Then only we take action. That will be too late. So in terms of all those things, we have to be forward looking and have to be really prepared for the future, maritime security challenges. With that, I would like to end my presentation here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for Professor Su Waimon, LLB, MCL, PhD, for her presentation about maritime security and law enforcement on the perspective of Malaysia. We see how she mentioned about the maritime threats on both of conventional and also the contemporary threats, which of course a problem for countries that have marine areas and concerns in making the sustainable maritime security with establishing the systemic security policy. I also appreciate the presence of MMEA organization as an effort to facilitate the handling of maritime issues by including various agencies related to maritime issues. And hopefully this will also can inspire another countries for making this such of institution. Thank you again. And then I will go to Professor SM Nur for his presentation today about Indonesia as the World Maritime Axis. Professor SM Nur, the time is yours.
All right, thank you, Miss Birka. Give opportunity for me to presentation my our topic. My topic is Indonesian as the World Maritime Axis. Chat. Open it, chat. Yeah, okay. Indonesia is the World Maritime Axis, yeah. Also, our topic is about World Maritime Axis, but lies Indonesia in the European literature, especially in classic literature, which call Far East. Yeah, Indonesia, the lies in Far East. Yeah, distinguished in the European mind, the spare Near East, like Greece, Turkish, Romanian, and Middle East, all Arabian countries and Far East, all the Asian countries were far from the Europe. So it's called Far East, yeah. And now, yeah. Just introduction. Okay. Geographically, Indonesia consists of large and small islands which number of approximately 17,504 islands and 48 straits in Indonesia. Yeah. 3/4 of this territory is the sea, with a coastline ledge of 9,561 kilometers. So the second longest after Canada, yeah? Second longest after Canada, the coastline, right? There are around 7,000 species in fish in the world, and 2,000 of them exist in Indonesia. And then on August 21, each year I celebrate the National Maritime Day. Okay. So Indonesia in the world, the largest island group in the world. Yeah. And so it's called archipelago states. Yeah. In the geographic of them, the greatest Sunda complex were the islands of Sumatra, Java, and Borneo. Other is the Celebes in the last group of Sahuls, which strands from the Bali, Strait, Timor, and Moluccas. Yeah. To move toward the maritime axis country will include the development of the maritime processes from aspect of infrastructure, politics, social culture, law, security, and economic. Yeah. In realizing Indonesia's world maritime axis, President Joko Widodo launches 5 main pillars in realizing Indonesia deals as a world maritime axis. First pillar, rebuilding Indonesia maritime culture. And the second pillar, committed to maintaining and managing maritime resources with focus on building maritime food sovereignty through the development of fishing industry by placing fishermen as the main pillar. And the third pillar, commitment to encourage infrastructure development and maritime connectivity by building maritime highway, seaport, logistic and shipping industry, as well as maritime tourism. The fourth pillar, maritime diplomacy, that invite all Indonesian partners to work together to maritime sector. And the fifth pillar, building maritime defense force. Right. Based on the calculation of Indonesian maritime expert, it's estimated that around 90% of Indonesian trade is transported by sea in Indonesia. So, while 14% of these international trade routes pass through Indonesia. This is an opportunity for logistic service industry and international trade. So, okay. This, yeah, service logistic opportunity for industry and international trade, yeah, and 40% of the international trade is carried by sea, yeah, and 40% via Indonesia in the world, right? And global trade flow Indonesia context this, yeah, from Asia, Europe, Asia, Africa, Asia, Middle East, intra-Asia, Asia, USVC, Asia, Western, yeah, SA, and Asia, Australia. Yeah. And then now, in the world maritime historiography, yeah, Majapahit, through his voyages, spread influence in the Malay Peninsula, Temasek, Ceylon, Siam, Burma, Champa, Cambodia, India, and China. In the 405, Cheng Ho sailing to the Nusantara, Sriwijaya, and Majapahit, and also Alfred Russel Wallace conducted research into the Nusantara in 1854 to 1862. Yeah. Cheng Ho was a naval official of the mixed Ming Dynasty. Yeah. And China, great explorer of the early 15th century. Cheng Ho led since extraordinary naval expedition for the Ming Emperor to the India, Arabia, and Africa. And Alfred Russel Wallace in discovery of Ternate and Moluccas Island in 1855. Yeah, it's natural selection marks the operate in the to return, yeah, to read the book of the Malay archipelago and island life in 1980. 80, yeah. This is the flow policy conduct by Cheng Ho, yeah. And conduct this to call Silk Route, yeah, in the ocean. Silk Route, there are two ways for the trade and commerce by the Chinese, that mainline Silk Route and through the Middle Asia from China, and Ocean Silk Route. So we'll look on the map after this map on the Ocean Silk Route. Indonesia, yeah. As the World Maritime Axis was called by President Joko Widodo, yeah. Before the international community during the 9th East Asian Summit meeting in Lanai Pai Tho, Myanmar on November 30, 2014. Yeah. The oration can be said the Republic of Indonesia's first affirmation in international forum. And then sea land crossings navigation. Yeah. Indonesia, Fiji, Papua New Guinea, and Bahamas and Philippines are fifth sovereign state set out in the UNCLOS 1982 as country declared as an archipelagic state. Archipelagic establishment of ALKI in Indonesia, Alur Laut Kepulauan Indonesia, and the flow the sea Indonesian. The government regulation number 70/202. Indonesia is the first archipelagic state in the world that has the sea separation seam in the Sunda Strait and the Lombok Strait. Yeah. And hypothetical boundary sensitivity. Until now, Indonesia still needs to solve a problem. Territorial sea borders with the Malaysian, Singapore, and Timor-Leste, yeah, especially in Malacca and Singapore Strait. Yeah. Each economic zone borders with Malaysia, India, Vietnam, and Palau, and also Natuna Sea and Andaman Sea. And continental shelf border with Malaysia and Palau. Yeah, and Sulawesi Sea and Eastern Pacific. Yeah. This is the new map. Yeah. This is the new map in called Northern Natuna. Yeah. North Natuna. Yeah. This also scientifically in the new map in Northern Natuna, because that map was denied by China, yeah? Reasoning by him that the among in the Northern Natuna Sea and the map declared by Indonesia, including to the South China Sea possessed by China. Yeah. And then Indonesia right the middle of processes strategic change, both geographical, geopolitical, and geo-economically. Yeah. Now it's popular in geopolitics to Indo-Pacific. Yeah. And then challenge to the Far Eastern. Maritime highway have great benefit of cutting huge costs and shipping goods to the uttermost and remote areas that were previously unreachable. And Presidential Regulation 106/2015 concerning implementation of public service obligation for transport of goods at sea. The Maritime Highway Regulation expected to enable serve the need of people of Eastern Indonesia through the supply basic goods, industrial and other strategic goods, and prices the much different from the price of goods in Western Indonesia. And then development strategic port support Indonesia highway of 6 ports in Eastern Indonesia, as well as development and construction port as maritime highway feeder port in 77 locations, mainly in Eastern Indonesia. Indonesia has potential to see areas that can be utilized optimally, particularly in the transportation sector. Indonesia's seas are not only served to connect the entire archipelago, but also safe transportation or international logistics across Indonesian archipelago sea lands. Yeah. Sea lands by Indonesia, yeah. This is total port of terminal Indonesia in approximately in 2055, 2155, yeah, in the port, commercial port, yeah. And then this is the maritime axis, yeah, from Sumatra, Java to Makassar, Surabaya, and Papua. And also 24, the strategic support by the highway in Indonesia, which called Tol Laut, yeah, Tol Laut in Indonesia called highway marine. Yeah, this strategic support. Okay, I think it's that short presentation by me about the Indonesia's World Maritime Axis. Thank you. I beg to host Mr. Birka, right?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Professor SM Nur, SHMH, for the presentation regarding Indonesia as the World Maritime Axis. As we know that Indonesia's strategic position has long been as a destination of countries with an interest in maritime traffic and its activities. Furthermore, Indonesia also has boundaries issues, including the issues of fishing as well as the other marine management. With the direction from the government police that to ensure the natural resource, especially marine resource, are to be improved, Indonesia must ensure also the strategic plans and other developments. This is actually related with the increasing existing potential and also ensuring the attachment and linkages between Indonesian territories. Thank you so much for all of the speakers for the very interesting materials that they have given to us. And I believe that everybody already have their own questions. So I will open the Q&A session, question and answer session, with inviting, I think due to the times, I hope there are 3 persons from the audience to use the raise hand feature, and on the question session, please state your name and to whom the question being directed. I will also to give people who have our audience who have a problem with the signal could raise their question into the chat Zoom, so I can read it to the our speakers. Now I see 2 questions from the audience. The person who want to raise a question. The first one is from Riyad Anwar.
Thank you very much, Ibu Birka. Good afternoon. My name is Riyad Anwar. I'm one of the lecturers in Faculty of Law Hasanuddin University, specifically International Department. So thank you very much for attending our international webinar. Straight to the point. So if permitted, I would like to address one question to Professor Shenoy and one comment to Dr. Mon. For Professor Shenoy, I'm really interested with your research with your presentation, because you basically come and approach and tell us that Asian scholars should take more interest in looking forward to the legal history. And in your case, you are focusing in conducting legal history research. Okay. Back again. So I'm interested with your focus of interest, that is to conduct legal history on international maritime law. Now, for fellow scholar in here who attending this webinar, I would like you to share your insight on what is the distinct research process, methodological process when conducting this legal history in international legal maritime. I do know for a fact, like I have experience to conduct a legal history on international treaty. And then one that particular interesting thing is that we have to be careful with the historiography, like which narrative that we specifically use. Like, because it's usually in Indonesian context during war, usually we have different people who probably pro-Netherlands and then pro-Portuguese, and then there is a pro-natives. They have their own separate different narratives. So it's really part of the transparency in the research to maintain that we look for this kind of authorship. We look for this kind of historiography approach. Now, in case of legal history in maritime, what is your take on that? What is specific resource that we should look for? And then for Dr. Mon, I think Dr. Man asked a question about the piracy. How is piracy in the context of Indonesia? I'm no legal maritime expert by no means, but I do have opportunity to attend the seminar by maritime ministries for a couple of months ago. So I may have a little bit insight on that, but please take this with a grain of salt. So in the context of Indonesia, piracy itself, like we don't have the specific legislations that prescribe piracy. What we do have is our own national code, which was a product of Dutch Wetboek van Strafrecht. I remember it specifically addressed the piracy and armed robberies was regulated in Article 438. But then again, yes, there is no specific legislation on that. And then the issue with this general criminalization is that there is no, so when they define piracy, it is more focused on the act of violence itself that was motivated by political means and political gains, but they did not explain about the use of it for private means, which is actually quite commonplace if we see the modern piracy right now, which is like, yes, it's confiscating good, it's trying to take over all the goods and good there. So I think that's really important insight from there. So we don't have that like more varied motivation, because I think when we're talking of criminal law, it's important also to consider about the motivation of the perpetrator, right? And also I do remember the presenter also mentioned that in practice, while piracy also happened a lot in Indonesia, I believe we are in number 2 in Southeast Asia. Before that, it is in Philippines. The issue is that because we only rely on the general criminal code, we don't have clear use of the punishment itself, like the minimum threshold of the punishments. So what happened is that like we have a couple cases, and then in these couple cases, some of it, especially with that involve a piracy conducted by local actors with the local ships, it has lesser punishments as to compare when the piracy was conducted against the foreign vessels. I think we remember the case in 2017 against one of the Indonesian locals, Eva Novencia. Like she was the infamous pirate queen in Indonesia. And what she did is basically she took over a Singapore vessels in the process. And what happened is that she received a way harsher punishment, because not only it involved the foreign goods, but also because it gained media attractions. So you see the problem in here, because we don't have clear threshold. Usually Indonesian court has this tendency, if they receive like media attraction, they receive political saliency, then the punishment will be harsher. So I think in that comment, I will conclude that if we would like to create this sort of like, because piracy is a transborder activity, right? It happens not in this in Malaysia. It could also transpass to Indonesia, Philippines, and Singapore. Then I think Indonesia's starting point should be to formalize the law specific to exclusive to the piracy, just like we have a terrorism specific law, and we have also specific law related to the pedophilia. I think that's pretty much of it. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much from Riyad Anwar for the question. I think he already giving the question for our speaker, Professor Amrita, and also Professor Suimun. I think it's Professor Amrita. Are you still in our Zoom? Oh yeah, so
yes. So it is a very good question, Professor Riyad, with regard to imperative to choose and which not to choose, right? But as far as international law historiography is concerned, we can find a lot of European texts, but less of other texts. That's the issue. So there are like various writings which I found as basic literature for my thesis, but then how far they are relevant is the question. So what I did was I read them, whatever was available. For example, Professor R.P. Anand, Professor Alexandrovics, and various other scholars who wrote about the Indian historiography from 1925, maybe before that. But after that, what I did was I read the current historians, how the Indian history has changed according to the historian's perspective. And after doing that, at times I also read European scholars, definitely, but compared them and understood what concept it was. So I adopted a methodology, definitely called the multi-civilizational perspective to international law, and looked at it, and also looked into 12 scholars' writings. But basically, I read many Indian texts and also original texts of, say, ancient times, and discovered a few things. In PhD, we do get a lot of time to do such research. But after doing PhD, I rarely get that much time to go back to each and every text and everything. But this is what I understand. Basically, taking out some primary literature who have talked about this particular topic, updating it with present, new texts on, say, Indian history or, say, history in general, and then updating it according to that. That's what I understood from my research. And at times, yes, there might be confusions, because the people who worked for the English East India Company wrote a lot about Indian history, and they also talked it from their perspective, because they wanted to establish their own laws. So while doing that, they also talked about the patriarchy in India, criticizing various aspects in India. So how to accept them and reject them, I think gradually we learn by updating the historical developments. Because as law scholars, we are not very much acquainted with history. We need to read a lot to go through that. I also borrowed a lot of concepts from Edward Said. Sometimes I read Foucault. So I think through such vast readings, we can understand what to take and what to reject. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Amrita. And I will just direct it to go to Professor Suwaimun, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Anwar. I think for me, it wasn't really a question, I think, right? Yeah, it's more like a comment, and thank you so much. It was such a good insight that to know about the Indonesian situation as well, because as we can see that Indonesia has such a vast maritime area, being an archipelagic state, and so based on like, maybe we can even have the different discussions on this, because I'm quite curious about different issues about Indonesia as well. In fact, I asked the questions on the maritime law enforcement, that Malaysia has MMEA. Does Indonesia also has like separate agency, being responsible for the maritime law enforcement? And based on your explanation, it seems that, Indonesia is more, it's like, if it's a foreigner, then the punishment may be harsher, means that there is also kind of like the fixed legislation, it's kind, in the sense that it's transparency. Okay, this is the crime of piracy, and if someone commits such crime, then the punishment will be this much. So can we say that in Indonesia, in terms of piracy, Indonesia doesn't have the specific legislation and also specific provisions for the piracy, right? So in that sense, then it's still the same situation like Malaysia. So I'm just curious, like another thing, right? I think if we talk about this, also including the South China Sea and all that policy, this foreign policy, when we talk about these maritime security issues, especially in today's context, I have a questions because I want to know about Indonesia. What is Indonesia's stance? You know, if you could contribute a little bit more on this, based on your experience. What do you think that? I know Indonesia is not the one of the claimant in the South China Sea, but what is their perspective? Like, how they view these issues and against China policy and all that. Yeah. Sorry, I'm asking that questions. If we have time, I mean, yeah, because I didn't get the questions, rather I got a comment. So it just like, I'm just asking what I want to know. Yes.
Ibu Birka, if I might just like real short follow back on that.
Hello? Hello?
Bu Birka?
Oh, yeah. Okay, you can go on, Riyad.
I'm sorry, it's supposed to be another question. Just
but please make it short because we have a limited time. Okay.
So just a follow-up, just like Professor Bir has stated, so we don't have claim over the South China Sea in this matter. What our interest, as far as I know, and also from attending that seminar, is that we would like to cooperate with our Southeastern alliance in related to maintaining regional security and peace. Now, if we try to stretch it back to the issue of piracy, then clearly the issue in here that Indonesia seeks to create more standardized enforcement regime in which like we could create a cooperation between Malaysia, Singapore, and Philippines in related to all these like the transnational organized crime and all that. I'm not really sure in the context of the regional security because yes, I'm not really well versed on the South China Sea itself, but I'm pretty sure that from the discussion that I had, it is one of Indonesian interests to ensure that it catch up with Malaysia, Singapore in terms of how they manage their common security, maritime security. Okay, that's pretty much for Birka. Back to you.
Okay, thank you for the, I think it's very fruitful discussion, especially for the issues of the between of Indonesia, Malaysia, and also the neighborhood seas issues. Yeah, and of course, I think this is not only the first webinar that we will have in today only. We hope in the future that we can also to move to other collaborations and also discussion. And for the last of the questions, I think it will be coming from Kadarudin. Yeah, please, Pak Kadarudin. Yeah, the time is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Bu Birka. What a great presentation for this afternoon. We got a lot of information about the law of the sea. I want to ask to all the presenter, actually me, Professor Amrita and Professor Su are friends who are participated in SEAL Trila in Singapore 4 years ago. The first one, the principle of freedom of the sea in practice cannot be separate from various crimes and violation of international law. One of them is the case of illegal transshipment, which is a crime in stealing fish, illegal transshipment or the exchange of goods between alternative modes of transport, has become an important component of any fishery supply that occurs either in ports or on international seas. The illegal transshipment case proves that the freedom to take advantage of the natural resources found in the international sea is gradually deviating. Each country justify any means to reap the wealth in the sea and is often used as an escape for ships that carry out smuggling such like this. Although in fact, Article 73 of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea explain that the coastal states in exercising its sovereign rights can board ships, inspect, arrest, and carry out court proceedings as necessary to ensure compliance with the laws and regulations stipulated in accordance with the provisions of the convention. Captured ships and their crew must be released immediately after being given an appropriate bail. To Professor Amrita, what do you think about dealing with this? And to Professor Su, there are many international law students present here, and I have explained to them that Professor Su, one of experts in the field of maritime law in Malaysia. Can you explain to them the basic difference between maritime law and law of the sea, or in principle, maritime law and the law of the sea are the same? What is the ideal law enforcement so that IUU fishing can be handled properly so as not to harm the state's finance? Because IUU fishing is a big problem for all coastal states everywhere, like Malaysia and Indonesia. And the last, to Professor SM Nur, how is the current development of the sea toll? Is there no problem with the Indonesian archipelago sea lanes or alur laut kepulauan Indonesia, which we know ALKI as international navigation routes? Thank you, moderator.
Okay. Thank you so much, Pak Kadarudin, for the questions. I think it's really fair. So 3 of the speakers have the question that being arise. So first of all, I will go to Professor Amrita, and then we can go to Professor Moon, and last to Professor SM Nur. Thank you.
Who's first?
Professor Amrita, Prof.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Amrita,
so,
please.
Yeah, so what I understand from Professor Kadarudin's question is, how can you control international crimes when you're giving freedom of the seas? Is that it? Yeah, freedom of the seas does not mean that you can do anything in the high seas, right?
The fact in Article 73 of UNCLOS. What do you think about dealing with this?
I think I'm not very clear, but what I understand is, how do you control, like freedom of the seas does not mean that anything can be done in the high seas, right? It does not mean that you can commit piracy or you can commit war, such kind of things. So there are mechanisms under the UNCLOS to control that.
Yeah, I mean, the principle of freedom of the seas cannot be separated from various crimes and violation of international law. One of them is the case of illegal transshipment.
Yes. So what I understand is you cannot do anything and everything under the name of freedom of the seas. It should be utilized for the common good of mankind, and it has to be controlled in some way. Freedom does not mean untrammeled freedom. At some point, there are mechanisms to control it. I think for further, Dr. Suemon would make it clear, because when she is talking about the maritime security, I think all these aspects come under that. Like she gave the example of piracy and other controlling mechanisms.
Thank you so much, Professor Amrita. So this is like a linkages question from Mr. Kadarudin about the freedom on the high seas, especially regarding that we still have to hold on into the common heritage of mankind, and also obligation from the UNCLOS itself to see the mechanism. And also I think Professor Moon can also tapping about the issues also related with that. Yeah, please, we take a turn to Professor Moon.
Yes, thank you so much. So before that, right, before I address that, just want to recap all the questions for me, yeah? So now I will talk about this freedom of the seas and violation of international law, or in terms of what aspect, yeah? It could be any crimes, IUU fishing or marine pollution, or, you know. And another thing about Dr. Kadarudin questions for me is I could record too, what is the difference between maritime law and law of the sea, right? That question is for me.
Yeah.
Yes. And the third one is about, could you please, not third one, the second one that I could record, could you please repeat that so that I can, you know, straight away cover everything? The second question for me. First is difference between maritime law and law of the sea. And the second question is?
What is the ideal law enforcement so that IUU fishing can be handled properly so as not to harm the state of finance? Because IUU fishing is a big problem for all coastal states everywhere, like Malaysia and Indonesia.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, so I will address that. So the first questions, that just to continue answering for the first questions. Yes, so like Professor Amrita mentioned just now, when we say the freedom of the sea, right? Freedom of the sea, freedom of the high seas, the common heritage of mankind, like whatever, we can see that it's not absolute when we say about freedom, right? So we cannot understand in the sense that high seas are free. So it means that we can do anything we want, because no country is exercising sovereignty. No country is has jurisdiction. So if we go beyond the 200 nautical miles and we are on the high seas, only jurisdiction would be the flag state jurisdiction, right? The flag state of the ship. So every state has to register with the flag state, and they will have the right to fly the flag of the state. It's under Article 90 of the UNCLOS. Then on the high seas, only the flag state has exclusive jurisdiction. So definitely flag states still can enforce the law if they violate any laws and regulations or international law. And sometimes what happens is that, yes, this is a very interesting question. So sometimes if you heard about this, for even for the students, like flags of convenience, because on the high seas, it's every high seas are free. No one exercises sovereignty. No country is exercising jurisdiction. So if you do something, if you violate the law, who is going to enforce the law? Who is going to take action against the ship who just intentionally pollute the water, or excessive fish bombing, which can affect the maritime environment, right? Damage to the marine environment. That's a violation of UNCLOS, obviously. So who is going to take action against this particular ship? Of course, the flag state. But the situation is that because of the concept of the flags of convenience, meaning that some countries, like for example, Panama, which is very notorious for the flags of convenience, They just register the ship and then they don't really have the particular regulations to follow. And they just get the registration fees and then you will have the right to fly the flag. So in that case, the flag states are not taking action against their own ships. So that's the reason why, and the law of the sea, they created this port state jurisdiction, that one of the jurisdiction that I mentioned in my presentation just now, port state jurisdiction. So if one of the vessel violated international laws and regulations, then it voluntarily entering your port, for example, Indonesian port, Indonesia can exercise port state jurisdiction and enforce the law for in case of marine pollution or in case of any other crimes. But especially for now, the major two crimes are for IUU fishing on the high seas. Yeah, not IUU fishing. Fishing means that these destructive ways, right? Violating laws and regulation of fishery laws and also the UNCLOS. Yeah, if they violate the fisheries law and also the environmental law, then in that case, port state can come in and enforce the law. But they will first inform the flag state, and in case if the flag state is not taking any actions, then port state can take action. Although port state, in that case, they didn't fish in Indonesian waters, right? But they can still take action against the ships. So that is the port under the port state jurisdiction. So the concept here is that although there is a freedom of navigation, not only on the high seas beyond 200 nautical miles, even within the 200 nautical miles exclusive economic zone, there is a freedom of navigation and freedom of overflight. But they have to give due regards to the coastal states laws and regulations. Yes, they can exercise freedom of navigation, but once they violate coastal states laws and regulations, then they will be responsible for it. They will have to be accountable. The coastal state can arrest. Did that answer your questions, Dr. Kadarudi? Or yes, is it okay? Yeah, then I will proceed, yeah? So the next question is, what is the difference between maritime law and international law of the sea? This is also a very interesting question, thank you. So, okay, it's most of the time that people use maritime law. If you realize, even when I say my research interest is in the international law of the sea as well as maritime law, so it's two different fields. So I would say that if we talk about law of the sea, it's purely public international law. We are not talking about private international law. I would say that maritime law is more about private international law. Yeah. So if we go to the PIL, then we are mainly talking about actors are the states, agreement between states, and that only states can go before the international courts and all that, right? So public international law law of the sea is just talking about coastal states jurisdiction, coastal state rights, sovereign rights, exercised, and then defining different maritime zones, and also, of course, the dispute resolution. So it's purely public international law for the law of the sea. But when we talk about maritime law, if you, I'm sure you have some courses as well, like, a carriage of goods by sea, Hague rules, Hague Visby rule, Hamburg rule, Rotterdam rules. Yeah, so this is maritime law, and shipping law, the registration of ships, and also the maritime lien, and then action in RAM, action in personnel, admiralty jurisdictions, which involve the different jurisdictions. So maritime law is more on private international law, not on public international law. Is that clear? Do you want me to explain what is the difference between PIL and private, or it's okay? Can I proceed, or it's the answer okay?
Yes, yeah, that is clear.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So what should we do to suppress this serious crime, IUU fishing? Because IUU fishing, it affects the nation's economies as well, the food sustainability, right? Definitely, it's very serious. And so what should we do? What should we do? Of course, the enforcement is very important. How do we control? Not only for the foreign fishermen. I know that Indonesia is also very rigorous in taking action against, illegal fishing vessels. Like they just bomb and sank the vessel, and it's quite famous with that. And I even heard, I'm not sure it's true, I read somewhere that they're going to even establish, build a museum of with the shipwrecks and all that. I'm not sure this information is true, because there were so many ships that which were sank for the illegal fishing. So for Malaysia, okay, I would say that from just my opinion, but my research doesn't really focus on just IUU fishing, but as one of the maritime security threats, and from the enforcement perspective, when we talk about enforcement perspective, we need to start with the prescriptive law. Do we have sufficient law to regulate, in any kind of activity when it comes to fishing, in order to secure our, fish stock and within our maritime territory? And when we talk about the fishing rights and sovereign rights for fishing, then EEZ, exclusive economic zone, is an important area, because within exclusive economic zone, except for the coastal states, no other state can come and fish there without the authorization of the coastal state. So in that case, the situation is that if another thing, that's the reason why I wanted to address the unresolved maritime boundaries. If we look at this, international personality of the state, defined territory is very important. If we don't have the defined territory, this is my area, this is your area, then definitely we cannot exercise our jurisdiction effectively, because it is unclear. Both sides is arguing that this is our area, we have right to do this, you can't stop me from doing this. So when it comes to fishing, it's the same thing. That's what happened. So now, like in the Professor Nur presentation also mentions that both Indonesia and Malaysia still having the unresolved maritime boundaries, then definitely there is the unresolved issues for when it comes to asserting or enforcing their laws effectively. So now, Malaysia and Indonesia recently, they are going to establish a collaborative activity like in suppressing other crimes in the Straits of Malacca. They are going to, have a cooperative mechanisms, collaboration to cut this, this serious crime of IUU fishing. So before we have the defined boundary lines, this is the only solution that we have. We need to work together and by mutual agreement. Both sides have to be there and then and have to take action. Enforcement is really, really effective. And we really have to be serious about it. We have to be serious about it. And I would say that working together is always the way. Even if we look at the international court judgment, look at this Pulau Batu Putih between Singapore and Malaysia, still there is no boundary lines. The judgment has been passed since 2008, but still the line has not been drawn. So, but if we don't have the, good relationship and we don't have the mutual relationship, then this can lead to the very serious issues, between the countries. So, of course, the enforcement. When it comes to enforcement, jurisdiction is important. For jurisdiction, we need the defined boundary lines. Then if we don't have for now, we need to have a collaborative mechanisms and we have to work together for the better outcome. That would be my opinion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Moon, for the very sharp perspective about the question that arisen from Pak Kadarudin. And also it's very helpful for our student in here to hear the brief of the information about regarding the maritime and also the law of the seas itself. Thank you again. And then I move to Professor SM Nur for the next questions.
Okay, Mr. Birka, how many for me? Question.
I think about 5 to 7 minutes. Yeah.
It's the last year for me. Yeah. Right. Yes. Okay. I answered about the archipelagic sea lands of Indonesia. It is called ALKI, Mr. Kalar. Yeah. ALKI is one of the Navy strategic concept by Indonesia. Yeah, right. And the ALKIs were established by three concepts from north to south in Indonesian map. Yeah. Then the ALKIs one with two branches in north begin from the South China Sea, yeah, the South China Sea or Natuna Sea passes through the Karimata Straits and the Java Sea, Sunda Strait to Selat Karimata and move to the Indian Ocean. It is the first ALKI, yeah. And then the second, begin from the Celebes Sea, pass through Makassar Strait, Flores Sea, Lombok Strait, and head to the Indian Ocean. And the third, it is there are some ALKIs here about the ALKIs A, B, C, and D. In the ALKIs third, and the five branch the south, including the ALKIs A, ALKIs B, ALKIs C, and ALKIs D in A. And ALKIs A start from the Pacific Ocean. Yeah, the Pacific Ocean traverses the Molucca Sea and Seram Sea, the Banda Sea and Ombai Straits, and head to the Sabu Sea. Yeah, and the ALKIs B navigates from the Pacific Ocean to Indian Ocean, alternative traveler Molucca Seas and Seram Sea, Banda Sea, and Led Sea. And for the ALKIs C, uses navigation from the Pacific Sea to Arafura Sea, alternative traveler Molucca Seas, and Seram Sea and Banda Sea, and ALKIs D is usual navigation from the Pacific Ocean to the Indian Ocean, alternative travelers in Molucca Seas, Seram Sea, Banda Sea, Ombai Strait, and Sapo Strait. And ALKIs E is used navigation from the Indian Ocean to the Celebes Sea, alternative travel sea in the Ombai Strait and Banda Sea, Seram Sea, Molucca Strait, and also use navigation as Arafura alternative travelation. This is the problem of the ALKI, the sea land of Indonesia. It just from the north to the south, but it's the question from the Australia. Why not from Australia to the the Malacca Strait? From the eastern to the west. It's the problem is the Indonesian traveler is here. Why not regulation about that? But I don't know. I can understand about that, Justice. Yeah. How about it?
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
I think it's full of our time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor SM Nur, for the answer. And then I will also to beg apologize to all of the audience because I couldn't open any session for the question and answer more because of we have a limited times. So that was the question and answer session for our webinar today. I will say a lot of thank you to our speakers, Professor SM Nur, SHMH, Professor Amrita Viswanat Senoy, LLB, MPhil, PhD, and of course for Professor Su Waimon, LLB, MCL, PhD, for their willingness in presenting on our webinar and hope will enrich the formulation of the law of the sea issues. And I will especially thankful to Dr. Kadarudin, SHMH, DFM, for connecting our qualified speakers today. We hope that this webinar will strengthen collaboration between the universities with the Kathmandu School of Law, Nepal, and the Faculty of Law, University of Malaya, especially for the maritime issues, and make us to motivate to strengthen our scientific capacity in faculty, and especially through Indonesia thoroughly in the future. Sorry again for all of the inconvenience in the implementation of this webinar, and hope we can meet again to the next of webinar about the law of the sea, and hope everyone always in healthy. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya. Best regard and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much. I will giving back to our master of ceremony.
All right, thank you, Dr. Birka Latif, SIM LLM. That was the presentation and discussion session of the webinar, Law of the Sea, Development and the Future Challenges. Thank you to our great speakers, Professor Dr. SM Nur SIMH, Professor Amrita Viswanath Chenoy, PhD, and Professor Miss Suwai Won, PhD. And the next agenda is the giving of appreciation certificate for our guest speakers by the Head of International Law Department, Dr. Iin Karita Sakarina. To Dr. Yes.
Yes, please set the certificate, please. First certificate. Yes. First certificate goes to Miss Su Waimon, PhD. Thank you very much for attending our national webinar today. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. Okay. Next certificate, it's appreciation to Dr. Amarita. Thank you very much. And then next, yes, Amarita, PhD. Thank you very much. And next certificate goes to our senior lecturers, Professor Dr. Samsudin M. Nur. Thank you very much, Professor, for the participation for today. Thank you very much for our honorable speakers once again, and maybe we can give applause together. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you, Bu Dr. Iin. And before we end our webinar today, I'd like to ask for all the participants in the Zoom to have your camera open so I can take a screenshot of us all together. And I will count to 3. Okay, everyone's ready? 1, all right. 1, 2, 3.
Oh, where is Amrita?
Yeah.
Nothing here.
I think we lost Amrita already.
She's still in our Zoom, but she's not opening the camera.
That's all right. Once again, everyone, 1, 2, 3. All right, thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of our webinar today. Thank you for all the speakers for providing us a great lecture today. And I will also thank everyone for your participation of today's webinar. And on behalf of the committee, I do apologize for all the inconvenience during the webinar. Stay safe and see you in the next occasion. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.